When a patient goes into surgery, it's so easy for us to focus on the procedure itself, but what's happening to their body, during and especially after, is just as critical. For years, clinicians have been trying to minimize surgical risks, and honestly, one landmark series of studies, the POISE trials, has completely changed the game. It's an amazing scientific story. So let's dive right in.
To really get why this is so important, you have to understand the sheer scale we're talking about. Every single year, more than 100 million adults all over the world have major non-cardiac surgery. And every one of them is facing potential risks, anything from a heart attack to major bleeding. Making surgery safer for this enormous group of people, well, that's one of the biggest challenges in modern medicine.
And this is exactly where the field of perioperative medicine lives. See, it's not just about what happens in the OR, it's the entire journey. From the moment a patient even thinks about having surgery, all the way until they're fully recovered. The whole point is to get ahead of problems, manage risks, and make sure we get the best possible outcome. This is the world that the POISE trials really set out to improve.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to follow the scientific story of these trials. We'll start with why surgery is such a high-stakes event, then get into the really surprising results of the first POISE trial. We'll see how that totally shifted the focus to bleeding, which led to the ambitious two-pronged attack of POISE-3. And finally, we'll wrap up by looking at the incredible legacy of this entire research program.
Okay, so first things first, why is surgery so tough on the heart, even if it has nothing to do with the heart? Well, it all comes down to stress. Major surgery puts the body under immense stress, which floods it with catecholamines, adrenaline. This just cranks up the heart rate and blood pressure, making the heart work way harder and demand a lot more oxygen. Sometimes it can strain it right to its breaking point.
So this led to a really logical question. If this huge stress response is the villain, what if we could just blunt it? Beta blockers are drugs that do exactly that. They block adrenaline's effects. So the hypothesis was pretty simple and really elegant. What if giving patients beta blockers around their surgery could stop these devastating heart complications before they even start? And that idea gave birth to the first POISE trial. We're not talking about a small study here. This was a massive, international effort. It included over 8,000 high-risk patients, and it was designed to get a definitive, final answer to that question. But the results? Honestly, nobody saw this coming. On the one hand, yeah, the hypothesis worked. The beta blocker did reduce heart attacks. But here's the crazy part. It also increased the risk of death and major stroke. It was a total paradox. The very drug that was supposed to protect patients was also causing serious, and in some cases, fatal harm.
So what on earth was going on? Well, the researchers dug deep into the data and they found the smoking gun, dangerously low blood pressure or hypotension. It turns out the beta blocker was doing its job a little too well. It wasn't just blunting the stress response, it was dropping patients' blood pressure so low that vital organs, like the brain, weren't getting enough blood. And that led to that devastating rise in strokes and death.
This discovery was a huge turning point. As investigators were analyzing all this data, another major risk factor started to come into sharp focus: bleeding. They found this incredibly strong independent link. Just like low blood pressure, major bleeding also starves the body of oxygen, and that puts patients at a much higher risk for complications like heart attacks and kidney damage, a whole new problem to solve.
This totally shifted the research focus. Now the question was, how can we safely reduce bleeding? And that brought a drug called tranexamic acid, or TXA, into the spotlight. Its job is to stop the body from breaking down blood clots too fast. It's an antifibrinolytic. Basically, it helps stabilize the clots that your body naturally forms, giving them a better chance to stop the bleeding.
But of course, this led to the next huge question. If TXA is so good at stabilizing clots to stop bleeding, could it accidentally cause unwanted clots? The dangerous kind that lead to heart attacks or strokes. This was the absolute crucial trade-off. Could you stop the bleeding without paying a terrible price somewhere else in the body?
So, to answer this new question, and to finally sort out the blood pressure issue from POISE-1, the researchers designed the incredibly ambitious POISE-3 trial. It was a brilliant two-pronged attack, set up to answer two massive questions all at once.
They used this really elegant method called a factorial design. So first, they took nearly 10,000 patients and randomly assigned them to get either TXA or a placebo. Simple enough. But then, a big group of those same patients were also randomized into one of two different blood pressure strategies. It's like running two giant trials for the price of one. Super efficient.
So what did they find? Well, the answer for TXA was crystal clear.
It worked. Tranexamic acid absolutely reduced major bleeding and cut down on the need for blood transfusions. And the best part? It did it without increasing the risk of those dangerous clots everyone was worried about. That was a huge win.
All right, now for that second big question, blood pressure. I mean, this quote from the trial zone protocol really says it all. We already knew that low blood pressure was incredibly dangerous. The real question was, what's the best way to prevent it? Could a more proactive strategy to keep blood pressure up actually be better than what we normally do?
So, the trial tested two very different strategies. The first was this hypotension avoidance strategy. For this group, doctors actually held certain blood pressure meds before surgery, specifically ACE inhibitors and ARBs, and they aimed for a higher blood pressure target during the operation. This was compared against usual care, where patients just kept taking their meds as normal and the team aimed for a standard pressure target.
And the result here was just as definitive and maybe just as surprising as the POISE-1 results. That more aggressive, proactive strategy to avoid hypotension, it showed zero benefit. It did not reduce the risk of death, heart attack, or stroke compared to just normal standard care.
So when you step back and put all these pieces together, from the beta blocker surprise to the focus on bleeding, the win with TXA, and the blood pressure result, what's the big picture? What is the overall legacy of this incredible scientific journey? Well, it's all about how this work has fundamentally changed clinical practice across the entire globe. The reason the POISE trials are so influential really comes down to a few key things. First, they were huge, real-world trials that answered questions doctors actually face every day. Second, it was a true scientific journey. Each trial learned from the one before it. They also established new concepts like MINS, or myocardial injury after non-cardiac surgery. And importantly, they weren't afraid to find harm, uncovering the hidden dangers of things we thought were helping. And because of all that, this body of work provides the kind of rock-solid evidence that literally writes the clinical guidelines we all use to take care of patients.
And this whole saga leaves us with one powerful final thought. We now have this incredible, robust evidence on what works, like TXA, and what doesn't, like routine beta blockers or aggressive BP management. So the question is no longer just what does the evidence say? The real question now is, how do we take these landmark findings and effectively translate them into everyday practice, at the bedside, for every single patient who puts their trust in our hands?